everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me now is Republican strategist and executive director of Principles First, Brittany Martinez. Brittany, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me back.
The House passed President Trump's big, beautiful bill in a narrow vote after a marathon overnight debate. And if you and I were talking this time yesterday, the chances of this happening, not only just a vote, but it actually passing through the House before that self-imposed Memorial Day deadline, it wasn't looking too good. So what do you think? What do you make of the bill passing through the House?
Well, a few things immediately come to mind. So the first is that we do have a Republican White House, House, and Senate. So that means regardless, this bill was going to pass in some iteration. So yes, I'm not surprised that it did pass ultimately, but I will also point out, and I think this is really important for viewers to think about, is that it was a months-long slog for Republicans to get to this point. A lot of late nights into early mornings, including today when it was voted on at 7 in the morning. In the dead of the night is when, the Congress is sort of voting and talking about and trying to move this legislation forward. I don't think that's a great look for Congress, for Republicans. But also, please remember that as soon as Trump won last year, what was the big talking point? He has a mandate. Clearly, to me, this isn't a mandate. It's a tough and close Congress. It was 215 to 214, and it's a slim majority in the Senate too, and that's going to be a battle as well. So I think that they have to be humble about it, the Trump administration, and realize they need to work with their colleagues across the aisle as best they can to move this legislation forward.
And I want to talk about where some of those divisions really were. Some Republicans, more moderate Republicans from blue states like New York, wanted an increase in that SALT cap. Other hardline GOP members wanted more steeper cuts. They also wanted to not see so much being added onto the deficit. There were also concerns about Medicaid cuts. I mean, this was a really remarkable turnaround for Speaker Johnson. How was he able to wrangle in these almost like cats and get something for everyone?
I think John Boehner famously said that being Speaker of the House was like herding cats. So yes, I think that's the perfect analogy to what we're seeing here with Congress and House Republicans in this specific situation. But yes, he did a good job. He was able to pull it off. I think a lot of people often underestimate Johnson, and he's proven time and time again to be able to deliver the agenda that he wants on behalf of House Republicans and Trump. And so, good for him on doing that. I think ultimately we'll see what the Senate does with this bill. I'm sure that they will have their own thoughts, and then it will come back to the House and they will have to resolve those differences. But this is absolutely a win for him, even though it is a tight margin.
And it's a compromise. I mean, no one gets everything that they want, especially in the Republican Party. I mean, no Democrat voted for this, but it's an over 1,000-page bill. So there's something for everybody to run back to their district and say, hey, this is what I got for you. Promises made, promises kept, that type of Republican rhetoric there. But let's talk about some of the things that this does. The bill expands and extends 2017 tax cuts, eliminates taxes on tips and overtime. It gives more border security funding. It's overall touted as President Trump's agenda. As a Republican, what do you like from this?
Well, I think there's things like the child tax credit. I think that's important. There's also now a new fund for children that were born from the end of last year. I think it's through 2029. And so I think that's going to help families, especially young families, sort of get a head start for their children. But some of the issues, and I know this wasn't your question, but I think some of the issues that we're going to maybe see Democrats run on, especially during midterms, is that Medicaid stuff that you're talking about. And, early indications, and we'll see what actually happens, but said that this could potentially cut Medicaid for 7 million Americans. And Trump has said he didn't want to make cuts to Medicaid besides waste, fraud, and abuse. He said 3 words. Those were the 3 words. And I think that we're going to have to see what that ultimately looks like, because Medicaid and Medicare have often been a rallying cry for the left. And I think this is probably going to be one of those things that helps them no longer be Democrats in disarray and get it together a little bit, at least enough to say to the American people, you know what, this is what it's done and this is how it's going to hurt you.
I do want to talk about the politics of this bill because, as you said, the CBO estimated it would cut Medicaid spending by close to $700 billion. It could also lead to as many as 7.6 million Americans uninsured over the next decade. You also noted that this was debated in the dead of night, so I'm curious about the optics there. And reportedly, estimates are suggesting this will make the poorest poorer and the richest richer in this country. And with those billions in SNAP cuts and cuts to Medicaid, estimates show that the lowest earning households will reportedly see a decrease in resources, while the highest income households will see more resources. So what do you make of the optics of this bill overall? I mean, did Republicans just hand Democrats ads for the midterms?
We'll see what comes out of this bill, but I do think that Democrats obviously have an opportunity to spin this here. And especially, and I think we've talked about this, Brittany, it's when did Republicans become the party to spend all this money? I think we're kind of blowing money like Democrats. We're supposed to be the party of fiscal responsibility, and this is estimated to essentially cost the government $4 trillion over the next decade. That's a lot of money when we're already $36 trillion in debt, and a lot of that came from the COVID times. And so concerns with that as well, in case there's any sort of national emergency, which, knock on wood, hopefully we never see anything like the likes of COVID again. But we need to be smart about the way that we are spending our money. And when we're going to potentially be going trillions of dollars in debt because of this bill, that's why you have some of those fiscal hawks in the Freedom Caucus who are concerned about it. And I think that if there's pushback from the Senate, the holdouts have made it clear, like Chip Roy, that this could potentially be problematic for him. He's not just going to rubber stamp it, I believe is what the terminology he used.
And Republicans have long been really just rallying against adding to the national debt. And this adds, as you said, trillions to it. I mean, can Republicans say, let's say this passes as is, obviously, I mean, undoubtedly it won't because it's going to the Senate now, but even if it adds trillions of dollars to the debt, can Republicans longer say, hey, we don't want to add to the deficit because this bill that they are backing does?
I think so. I think that would probably be the way to go about it. It's the one big, beautiful bill, as it's literally called, which I think is hilarious. It's not just a fun phrase anymore. It's the actual name of the bill. You can look it up at congress.gov. And I think it is one big bill. I think that there's a way for them to say, listen, this is where we're putting a lot of our eggs in this basket. This is where a lot of the spending and the deficit is going to go towards. And we're going to be more conservative when it comes to finances moving forward. But I would say this is probably an early indication of maybe where Congress will be going under the Trump administration. And something that's been said about him is that he's a conservative populist, so meaning that he is very pro sort of those social programs that put money in Americans' pocket. However, the problem with that is that it adds to the deficit and could have potentially some long-term effects when it comes to those sorts of things.
And President Trump met with members of the House GOP earlier this week, and that was described as a pep talk. He went in there. He did call Thomas Massie a grandstander over not supporting the bill. He also said that he should be voted out. Thomas Massie seemingly unmoved by this because he did not vote for the bill in the vote this morning. I mean, what are your thoughts on that sort of strong arming?
I think that, and Brittany, correct me if I'm wrong, I say this more as a rhetorical question, is this standard practice for sitting presidents of the United States to say to members of Congress who are sitting members of Congress, like, do this or we're going to get folks to primary you? That seems a little bit not passing the smell test to me. I think that's a little strange, don't you?
Well, I've in all of my years of covering politics, I've never seen a president say that, hey, you don't agree with me, you're out of here, you should be voted out, you're a grandstander. When Thomas Massie said he was, and it's not like Thomas Massie has flip-flopped on these positions. These are long-held positions. But Speaker Johnson, he was celebrating this. He called this a historic vote. He was really touting this legislation, but he said he knows that this isn't the end of the road here. This still needs to go to the Senate, and now it's in the Senate's hands. And what do you make of that? I mean, what changes do you think are going to happen? How tough of a road do you think this is?
I've been reading reports and, I have friends in the Senate just kind of following the way that they interact with the Trump administration so far this year. I think that they have quite a uphill battle ahead of them. I don't know. I think it'll ultimately pass again. It's a Republican Congress fully and White House, so we'll get some iteration of this bill. But I do think that some of those Republican senators who have had some issues with the Trump administration are going to push back on certain things. I think we probably won't see any Democrats voting for it, or if we do, it'll be like one or two. But the thing we have to think about is that the majority in the Senate for Republicans is bigger than the majority in the Senate for the House, and they already had a hard enough time. So I can see that also happening when it comes to the Senate this time around.
What do you think are some of those biggest concerns here? Do you think it's the cuts to SNAP, the cuts to Medicaid, adding trillions to the debt? I mean, where do you think the toughest conversations are going to be in the Senate debate?
I think it's a combination of all those things. I definitely think that it's adding the trillions of dollars. I've seen some senators come out and say that they have problems with that. When it comes to SNAP, I think that's probably going to be an issue as well. And, again, Republicans are in the majority, but I've already seen Chuck Schumer call out SALT and issues with that and said New York Republicans should be ashamed. And, Mike Lawler very quickly pounced on that and said, you didn't add $1 towards SNAP, towards SALT when you had everything, and we've been able to quadruple it for the American people. And so I think that that will probably be the narrative that Democrats push, and I think that Republicans will probably be the most concerned about some of the fiscal things in this bill.
And that was an interesting argument that Chuck Schumer brought against Mike Lawler, because Mike Lawler seemingly held the line because they were not trying to give an inch on the SALT demands. He said, we're not quitting. And he got that $40,000 cap. He got it raised 4 times. And I want to talk about Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, because he voted for the Republicans' stopgap spending bill in March. This ultimately, as we remember, averted a government shutdown, but it left many House Democrats feeling this deep sense of betrayal, because this was an 11th hour vote by Schumer. Do you think that there's going to be any Democratic support in the Senate for this? Do you think Schumer's going to support it? I mean, what do you think that looks like?
I think I can see a world where there is some Democrat support, potentially maybe in a red state, a purple state, those who have an upcoming election in 2026 and need to be careful, especially in a state where Trump won, but they're a Democrat, right? I think those are the folks that we should be paying attention to, who could potentially vote for this bill. But regardless, I don't really see it being a grand bipartisan effort. I think it'll be 1 or 2 senators.
And President Trump, he obviously celebrated this House win. They got it before Memorial Day. That was their self-imposed deadline. President Trump called this arguably the most significant piece of legislation that will ever be signed. What do you make of that characterization? Do you think, how much of an impact do you think that this legislation is going to have?
I think it will have a big impact, especially on his legacy. When we were talking about the funds that are being given to newborn children, they had called it the MAGA Fund, and it was an acronym. And then they decided, later on in the 11th hour to call it the Trump thing. I think that is really narcissistic, but also coming from a PR perspective. He wants people to remember, after he's long gone from being president of the United States, that this is the Trump money, right? And so when you look at those sorts of things, I think they've been very intentional about the way that they're going about it. Now, will this be great or will this be bad? I think time will tell. But when they've been able to extend the tax cuts from 2017, which Republicans have pretty much said that are a good thing over all of these years, and it was important to continue. I think that's going to be part of his legacy, is the Trump tax cuts. That's what they've called them.
Well, I know as this bill makes its way through the Senate, as there are debates on Medicaid, adding to the debt, and everything in between, I hope you come back on and join me and break it down. Brittany Martinez, I always appreciate our conversations. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me.